Boy, a lot of news broke yesterday after I recorded early in the morning. I had stuff to do, so I didn't want to wait till the evening. So I'm going to just have to talk about it today. We've got the election results in Serbia, Hungary, the failed coup in Pakistan, and the so-called Bucha massacre. Actually, you know what? I shouldn't. I don't think it's disputed that it was a massacre in Bucha. I think the dispute appears to be who perpetrated it. But we'll cover things in order. First of all, Serbia, I did not expect to be very well contested. I don't think anyone really thought that Alexander Vucic, I think that's how you say his name, pro-Russian guy in Serbia. Serbia's been pro-Russian for as long as Serbia has existed as an entity separate from the Ottoman Empire, so that's not surprising. Although I guess you could say, well, as a part of Yugoslavia during the Cold War, they were kind of with the non-aligned movement stuff, and they were, you had the Tito-Stalin split. But Tito was a Croat, so I don't put that on the Serbs. As far as I'm concerned, the Serbs have been pro-Russian since time immemorial. So not a shocker there. Hungary, the West was hoping that they could overthrow Orban, and I should say overthrow, that's the wrong word. I do think they wanted to just defeat him in the election. They weren't going to try and start a coup yet. It is still an EU member state, Hungary. I don't think that a military coup would look too good for them. So they wanted to beat Orban by pumping in lots of money and sanctioning Hungary, Orban's government in Hungary, and none of that worked. In fact, I believe that this was Orban's greatest victory ever. I did the math. He gained a couple seats in this election. Prior to this election, he had 66.8% of the parliament, seats in parliament. So just shy of a two-thirds majority. Now he has 67.8%. So, actually, no, 66.8, because 66.66, that's a two-thirds majority. So we already had a two-thirds majority now that I think about it. And he has an even bigger majority now. I think they gained like 2 seats. And remember, it's Fidesz, I believe that's how you say it, and like one other really tiny party that has like 5 seats, against basically every other party in Hungary, including Jobbik, which I guess I haven't paid attention to Hungarian politics for quite a few years. I thought that Jobbik used to be to the right of Fidesz, and that they were, a part of Orban's coalition. Now, apparently, they're a part of a coalition with the socialists and the Greens and other left-wingers. And I guess now they're just supposed to be, the moderate, center-right, pro-EU, blah, blah, blah kind of party. Sort of like the French Republicans or the CDU in Germany. And so I believe I went over yesterday. I wanted to talk more about Hungary. Yesterday I ended up talking all about France. If Orban had somehow been defeated, and I didn't think that Orban really was going to lose, but he could have done a lot worse than he did. He certainly did much better than was expected, within the mainstream establishment lead. It's not something that could at all be considered even a moral victory for the neo-libs. For I believe Soros called it the Soros Empire. I think that Hungary in the new world order that we're told so much about is actually in a quite an envious position. You might think that hey, here they are wedged between the EU and Russia, which are at each other's throats. Oh my gosh, wouldn't you hate to be them? Well, I mean, no, I don't think so. Because I think that Hungary has the potential to play both of these sides off of each other. Remember, it's not like Hungary is outright taking Russia's side in the war. They're just saying we want to remain neutral. But of course in the West, if you're not with us, you're against us. That's how the West interprets that. And so they hate Hungary, they want Orban overthrown, but it's clear that they can't get rid of Orban. Not through conventional subterfuge. The soft power tactics have not worked against Orban. They've been trying for a long time, and he's hung on. So what can they do? Kick him out of the EU? Push him into the arms of Putin? Perhaps. And you know what? I think the EU is actually dumb enough to do that. There have been people talking about kicking Hungary out of the EU. That would be great for Hungary. But if I were the EU, I would want to try and keep Hungary somewhat within my orbit. You know, the EU thrives on expansion. I don't think that the EU wants to be contracting. And honestly, if I were the leader of Hungary, I would want to stay on, relatively good terms with everyone. I wouldn't necessarily want to be in the EU. I think I would be happy, much happier being out of the EU. But wouldn't want to alienate the EU and have them, blockade me. The best position to be in, I think, would be. I keep thinking of the analogy. I don't want to make it because I don't know how many people will get it. But I think of the Fazanis I know it sounds very nerdy, The Legend of the Galactic Heroes, in which you have two great empires. You have the corrupt neoliberal Federal Republic. I won't give the names, and then you have the evil empire, and both of them are pretty corrupt and bad in their own ways, in different ways. It's a great story, but you have the Fazanis in the middle, who are neutral in the war and are very small, but they're able to play both sides off of each other and sell arms to both sides, and of course conduct banking services. And so the result is that tiny little Fazan, or I think that's how you say it, or Fazan, whatever. It's Phezan, I think is how they spelled it. Ends up being, on a per capita basis, far richer than either, the Republic or the Empire, which I'm calling that sort of in a colloquial sense. And no, I don't think that Hungary is going to be doing arms deals, with the EU and Russia and conducting financial services. Although I think that they could perhaps parlay their economy into something like that. But I think that being geographically positioned where Hungary is, right on the edge of the Ruski Mir and in the European Union, allows it to parlay its neutrality to a much greater extent than, let's say, Switzerland could these days. Switzerland, think about it, is completely encircled by the European Union. Switzerland no longer really has the advantages of there's not as much of an advantage of Switzerland remaining neutral as there used to be, which I think is largely why Switzerland isn't neutral anymore. Switzerland is firmly allied with Western neoliberalism. And so Hungary could become the new Switzerland. I don't know if they want to be. I don't know if that's what Orban wants to do. I think that Orban is much more concerned with cultural matters, domestically in Hungary, than he is with, how he positions Hungary internationally. And so he might feel that, aligning himself more with Russia increasingly would further, his domestic political goals, because Russia, unlike the European Union, is not only less hostile to traditional values. Russia is trying to promote itself as a defender of traditional values. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are. I don't want to say that, the Russian government is just filled with, good Christians who love Jesus. I don't want to say that. I also don't want to, question their faith or anything like that. I'm just saying that that's the political tract that the Russians have taken. And so obviously they're not going to be hostile to the values of the Hungarian government like the EU is, clearly. I mean, the EU is deeply offended by the Hungarian government's unabashed promotion of just normal European Christian values. And it should also be noted that neutrality is not always, a guarantee of safety. It's not always something that is going to buy you great prosperity like the Swiss have enjoyed for so long. It takes more than that. Sure, Austria got on just fine during the Cold War, being a internationally neutral, while still, remaining clearly aligned culturally and politically with the West. If you closed your eyes and couldn't see that Austria's flag did not fly at the NATO capital, but if you were just someone who toured Europe, Western and Eastern Europe, you would think from visiting Austria that it's probably a member of NATO. Yet it was not then, and still isn't today, I believe. I believe that Austria is still not a member of NATO. Doesn't mean as much as it used to, but during the Cold War, that mattered. They were a neutral country with Western values. And so Hungary, which of course historically was joined at the hip, literally, with Austria, was the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. I think that they could, in this new Cold War, play the mirror image. They could be a internationally neutral country with Eastern values. But of course, we're quite a ways away from that. Hungary is a member of NATO, don't forget, in addition to being a member of the European Union. But it's one of these countries like Turkey, to where you look at it and, say whatever you will about them. They clearly are not in line with the EU. And there was a time when, by the way, when Turkey was considered for joining the EU. They were pushing that for a long time. Now all that's thrown out the window. But just because Turkey wasn't as far along as Hungary doesn't mean that they can't have the same reversal in Hungary. Yes, Hungary is more integrated into Europe on paper than Turkey is. But all that can be undone because, frankly, the facts on the ground in Hungary just don't mesh well with the idea of European integration. And forgive me if you know more about this than I do, because I'm getting a little bit outside of my depth, so I might be making another false comparison here. But if I remember correctly, after the fall of the Estado Novo in Portugal, which of course was a staunchly anti-communist regime, which was notably neutral during the Second World War. Salazar believed that that was his greatest accomplishment as technically prime minister, but the dictator of Portugal, was keeping Portugal out of World War II and making sure that their people did not get thrown into that meat grinder. I would agree with him. That was probably the best thing he ever did. But after the death of Salazar, his successors were not able to hold things together, and the regime fell and was replaced with a very left-wing government coalition of parties that lives on to this day. And so what you ended up with was a NATO member, Portugal, which had a revolution and ended up with a very left-wing government. Ordinarily, you would think, well, gee, they're going to go communist and they're going to join, the Soviet bloc. But the problem was, geographically, Portugal was very, very far from the Soviet Union. It was nowhere near the Eastern Bloc. It was on the Atlantic itself. It was far west of many Western countries. And so Portugal remained a NATO power, but a NATO power that was, frankly, had more in common with the Soviets. And during this time, Portugal became sort of Lisbon in particular, a neutral ground where there was a lot of, espionage going back both ways, where you had Soviet and Western spies, going around and doing all sorts of unsavory things, I'm sure. And I wouldn't say that any of this, necessarily benefited Portugal, but it is just another example of a country where, during the Cold War itself, both sides were able to feel somewhat at home. They had reasons to feel welcome and secure there. And, I think it's clear at this point from the way I'm analyzing this that if I were in Orban's position, I would try and create a similar atmosphere. I would not want to push the West out completely. You would just make it clear that you don't want their cultural rot coming in, but business deals and the like, maybe not big business deals, the kind that are culturally impactful, but other things, general normal relations between countries, you would want to welcome with the West, and you would extend the same invitation to the Russians and their allies. Because believe it or not, it's not normal through normal international relations for your trade and exchange to come with extra baggage of like cultural infiltration and what's the term I'm looking for? Subversion. That's not a normal thing that you do to a country that you want to be friendly with. And maybe the EU is just too anti-Hungary at this point to be able to engage in normal relations with it. Maybe the EU really is bound and determined to take down Hungary's government. But perhaps if Hungary were kicked out of the EU or whatever, and was, and the EU no longer looked at it as sort of a misbehaving child, maybe the EU would be willing to engage the Hungarians more as, as a sovereign state. I didn't want to make this all about Hungary, and I'm tempted to keep going on with this because I do think I'm getting somewhere. I do think that I'm developing this thought, but I wanted to talk about Bucha, and I wanted to talk about there was one other incident that is now being reported today. So I do think that I'll probably leave this off here, maybe put a pin in it, and I'll come back to it at a later date the next time I talk about Hungary. But I would say out of anywhere in Europe, Hungary has the brightest future, because it's clear that they're not going to try and alienate the Russians. They're going to continue to exchange and trade with Russia, and there are obviously essential exports from Russia, which a landlocked country in Central Europe like Hungary would need: oil and gas. And most of the rest of Europe, to varying extents, seems to be bound and determined to completely cut off their nose to spite Russia's face. So, moving on to the war in Ukraine, this news about Bucha broke yesterday. I think it was probably starting to come out. I hadn't seen it yet when I recorded yesterday, but there wasn't enough information out then. So what is being called the Bucha massacre, we are told, was a series of killings, apparently 80 civilians killed in a town called Bucha outside of Kiev, and the deaths of these civilians were revealed as the Russians, withdrew, because of course we know that the Russians are losing and they're in very poor shape, and their troops are starving, and frostbite is becoming an issue, because the Russians aren't used to the cold winters of Ukraine. You know what? I don't want to talk about that nonsense. I'll just focus on what happened at Bucha. So the Russians leave a couple days on March the 30th. March 31st, we get word from the mayor. Hey, we're all clear. Everything's good. We're back in control. Everything is as it should be. April 1st, now I hear a lot of people saying it was April 2nd and April 3rd. April 1st is when I'm seeing on Twitter the first videos being reported of dead bodies in the streets. So this is supposedly 2 days after the Russians left. Now, you might say, oh, well, these people, they didn't have communications on the whole time that the Russians were there. This is, so all this stuff is just starting to leak out. Well, no, apparently, cell phone service was active the entire time that the Russians were occupying this town. So it is a little strange that we didn't hear anything. We didn't hear any chatter about this supposed massacre of 80 civilians at the hands of the Ruskies. That is until 2 days after the Russians left. Now, the other thing that we saw is that there was a video, now deleted, apparently, of some Azov boys strolling through Bucha. I believe they were calling themselves the Boatmen. I don't speak Ukrainian, so I can't exactly verify what they're saying, but from what the translations I'm seeing is that they say something about, they saw somebody without a blue ribbon. The blue ribbon, of course, indicates support for the current Ukrainian government. I know that. I've seen the blue ribbon, or the blue armbands around people throughout the entirety of the war. It's a very common sight if you look at pictures of the Ukrainian side. And in response to seeing people without these blue armbands, someone said in the group said, "Can I shoot them?" And another person says, F yeah. So the implication here is that the Azov boys, who claim to be in Bucha, felt that they had the right to kill people without blue armbands. And something that you'll notice if you look at all these pictures, these many pictures of these 80 bodies in Bucha, I don't know if there's a picture of each individual body, but there's a lot of pictures of a lot of different bodies. And nowhere do you spy someone with a blue armband. In fact, there are some people who are wearing white armbands, quite a few people. So you have to ask yourself, well, what's this white armband mean? Well, apparently, look into it a little bit. The white armband is the Russian equivalent of the blue armband. That is what people, who support Russia are, in fashion to wear. And so now we're starting to get a little bit of a clearer picture. We're told that the Ruskies, on their way out of Bucha, decided to start massacring civilians who supported them and their side. I guess punishing them for being loyal and stabbing them in the back to say, haha, you were so stupid, you supported us, the Ruskies, but in the end we're all going to kill you. But they didn't seem to kill any overtly pro-Ukrainian civilians, as nobody appeared to have any blue armbands on. And at this point, I started to severely question the veracity of the story that's being told by the Ukrainian authorities. And, you start putting the puzzle pieces together, and it almost makes you think, maybe these Azov boys who were talking about killing people without blue armbands, maybe they killed these civilians. Because, of course, the videos, we heard nothing about this until April 1st. The first reports of these people being killed. The Russians were gone by March 30th. Cell phone service was intact the whole time, from what I understand. Anyone could have, just called out and, even anonymously called the New York Times hotline, which you can do to report stories, to leak things, and said, oh my gosh, the Russians are slaughtering civilians here in Bucha. They've killed 80 of us. And they're killing their own supporters. It's remarkable, But nobody said that. We heard nothing about people being killed until after these supposed Azov guys arrived in Bucha, according to themselves. They're the ones who posted this online, who posted the video saying, hey, yeah, here we are. This is what we're going to do. Can we kill these guys without blue armbands? Oh, yeah. And so it all really makes you think, doesn't it? And I think that we're all probably thinking the same thing right about now, at least most of us. But I don't think that I can overtly say it here on YouTube. Some people are. I'm not sure how long their videos will be up. But for now, I haven't had too much trouble with YouTube. I'm very low profile. I have make almost no dent in, impact. I've only had a few videos removed, and they haven't given me strikes for them. So I'm not going to push it too much. I think you know what I'm talking about. I think we are all on the same page as far as this is concerned. Now, in another town around Kiev, where the Russians apparently have also just pulled back, we are getting videos, because the media are being let in, to see these things, of an alleged mass grave, which contains the body of the mayor of that town, as well as her family, including her young children, who apparently we're told were all shot twice in the back of the head, and buried in shallow graves by the evil Ruskies. Now, as of this moment, I haven't seen any holes in the story. I mean, I just see kind of blurry pictures of some dead people lying in dirt. They vaguely look like the pictures of the mayor and her family, so I have no real reason to doubt that that is her, unless she shows up alive somewhere, which, interestingly enough, there have been people who the Ukrainians told us were dead who later, and were supposedly killed by the Ruskies, who later showed up, telling a very different story and saying, no, I am indeed, in fact, alive. Maybe some of you remember that poor pregnant mother who was a victim of the Russian bombing of the maternity ward in Mariupol, who is now appearing on her Instagram, claiming that she is, in fact, alive. It's interesting how that stuff works. But for now, it's plausible that these bodies are of the mayor and her family. But considering what happened in Bucha, what's happened in Mariupol, what's happened across the country, seeing Ukrainian politicians who are accused of being too pro-Russian, seeing them killed, at this point, I cannot take the Ukrainians' word for any of this until we have more evidence. Because all I'm waiting for is for, some obvious thing to come out, which blasts a giant hole in their narrative, like the white armbands did. Now, I'm not saying that the Russians have committed no atrocities. I mean, I can't think of any army that goes through a war without committing some atrocities. So any one of these might be real, but there's obviously a lot of false flags mixed in here. Some pretty dumb false flags too. And so that's the problem when the Ukrainians try to stage a bunch of false flags against the Ruskies. When the Ruskies eventually do commit a real war crime, a real atrocity, good faith, neutral people like myself are going to doubt them. That's the whole story of the boy who cried wolf. And so that's the problem now. This mayor, the mayor and her family may have very well, for some reason, been murdered by the Ruskies and buried in a shallow grave. But this town where we're told this mayor was killed is right near where there was this massacre, which seems to be grossly misrepresented in the media and by the Ukrainian government in Bucha. And in that town where we're told that the Ruskies, massacred all these people, the mayor himself is doing just fine. He's alive. So why would they kill this other mayor? These are mysteries. I can't know at this point. But I can tell you, I'm skeptical of the narrative that is being pushed by Kiev and their media allies in the West. But this is not stopping the President of the United States from calling Putin a war criminal who needs to be put on trial for war crimes. Apparently the UK, the Russians called for an independent investigation from the UN to be sent to Bucha and investigate, these atrocities. They'll be interested, and the UK, I guess, is currently, the rotating, head of the Presidium of the UN Security Council, or whatever the hell they call it. And so they vetoed or knocked down Russia's request for that, and now the British are apparently making their own request for, I guess, the same thing, investigation into war crimes and in Bucha and other areas. So we'll see where this goes. But if the West conducts an investigation via the UN, which is clearly slanted and not neutral, I would have to assume that they would do so because the truth is probably not on their side. Whereas if the West goes along with a neutral investigation, which both sides are going to say, oh, we want a fair investigation. Yeah, they're going to say that. But which side actually, tries to make that happen, to me, is a proxy for who's telling the truth. And it'll be hard to tell, but we might be able to tell based on, certain decisions and what they're advocating for and safeguards, against contamination of the investigation that are proposed. That should give us some hints as to who feels the truth is on their side. Because the people who don't have the truth on their side will inevitably have to cut corners and do some shady stuff in order to ensure that they get a result that is conducive to their interests. Whereas the folks who are telling the truth are incentivized to make sure that the investigation focuses squarely on the facts. So, with that said, ton of happening, but I'm going to cut it off there, and I will see you folks back here tomorrow.